The Baal Shem Tov passed away on Shavuos 1760, but the exact day of his passing and the time and manner of his burial have long been subjects of controversy and mystery. In this class, we explore this subject by learning about two major debates regarding burial on Yom Tov that emerged during the Middle Ages. There was a chassid of the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab whose name was Reb Menachem Mendel Novikov. And a number of years ago, in Tafshin Samach Vav in 2006, in a journal called Heichal Baal Shem Tov, they published a notes that he had containing many different stories and many different pisgamim that he heard. He was in Lubavitch. Later he went to Eretz Yisrael, and that's where he passed away in 1943 in Eretz Yisrael. And so as far as I know, these Rishonim, these notes of his were not published until then. There are a lot of interesting things that one can find there, and our focus is going to be something that relates to Shavuos and the passing of the Baal Shem Tov. So he writes as follows: B'shnas Tov Reish Nun Tes, in the summer of 1899, Kasher Hayisi B'Lubavitch, I was in Lubavitch for Yom Tov. Hayisi B'Achsanya Achas, I was staying at the same home, at the same residence with Harav Hagoyin Reb Leivik Shnerson, Yekaterinoslav, who would later become the Rav in Yekaterinoslav. In 1899, the Rebbe's father, Reb Leivik, was not Rav in Yekaterinoslav. That happened about 10 years later, but he's writing these notes. He didn't write this in 1899. He's writing it 20 years later. By that time, Reb Leivik was the rabbi of Yekaterinoslav, and he's remembering what happened then. V'hu achal, Reb Leivik had his Yom Tov meal, his Shavuos meal, Eitzel Admar Zatzal, by the Rebbe Rashab. V'chasher ba misham mesudas ha'erev, and when he came back from the Yom Tov meal, I didn't have the Yom Tov meal in Beis Harav. I wasn't related. Reb Leivik was related, and so he had the Yom Tov meal in the Rebbe's house. Separately, he told me about the conversation that happened. Shasho alas Admar, he asked the Rebbe Rashab, Ma sainis talek HaBaal Shem Tov Zatzal. When did the Baal Shem Tov pass away? We know it was Shavuos. The question is, which day of Shavuos? Here you see that a chassid of Chabad, in fact, someone from Beis Harav, was not sure what the proper answer to this question is, which is why he's turning to the Rebbe Rashab and asking the Rebbe Rashab what he thinks about this issue. Reb Leivik himself is not sure. Why is he not sure? So let's jump to text number 2 for a second. This will give us a little bit of a taste of the doubt that has resided for many decades on this issue. So there's a sefer that was printed in Lublin in 1930 called Kerem Yisrael. This sefer is about the two families, the Ruzhin dynasty and the Chernobyl dynasty, and about these two Hasidic dynasties. And they write there as follows on page number 12. There are differences of opinions about the passing of the Rebbe Rashab, whether it happened on the first day or the second day of, the passing of the Baal Shem Tov, whether it happened on the first day or the second day of Shavuos. The story goes, the book continues to say, that when 12 months were up from the time of the Baal Shem Tov's passing, the Talmudim gathered to celebrate his yahrzeit, and v'nafla mevucha, and they were all confused, and they couldn't figure out if he passed away on the first day, if he passed away on the second day. Zeh oimer b'koi, v'zeh oimer b'koi. Each one said something else. As nimnu v'ganru, so they decided that it's b'fchinas v'lo yada ish es kfurasai, just like with Moshe Rabbeinu. We do not know the place of his burial, so it is with the Baal Shem Tov that we do not know the day of his burial. Now, is this a reliable story to what actually happened in the year Tovkuf Chaval of 1761, the first yahrzeit of the Baal Shem Tov? I don't know. We don't know. It's a little bit of a funny story that the first year after the yahrzeit, they don't know when their Rebbe passed away the year before. You know, sometimes there are doubts when a passing happens very close to the Shkia or at Bein Hashmashos, but as far as we can tell, the one report about the timing of the Rebbe of the Baal Shem Tov's passing in Shivchei Baal Shem Tov said that it happened at Chatzos HaYom, and there's no indication in any of the sources that this is the reason of the doubt. And so therefore, it becomes a little odd that there would be a doubt. Why couldn't they know that, and befrat the first year after, that they couldn't figure this out? So this is a little bit of an interesting thing. Hold on a second, we'll do that at the end. However, what it does tell us is that by the year 1930, when the Sefer is published, and obviously for many decades before, there was a doubt over this issue. How exactly it arose, we'll revisit later, but definitely this is what years earlier, in 1899, Reb Leivik is echoing when he's asking the Rebbe Rashab. There is this doubt out there in the world about the Baal Shem Tov's passing, which day of Shavuos it happened, and so please, what do you think about this matter? By the way, I should add here, just if you want to quibble, that there's something that's not so meduyik in this report over here. It says after 12 months of the Baal Shem Tov's passing, they gathered for his yahrzeit, but because Tov Kuf Chav Aleph was a Shana Mu'beres, so then his yahrzeit would have been after 13 months, not after 12 months. But whatever, that's just for the quibblers. Okay, so let's go back to the story. And what did the Rebbe Rashab answer? So back to text number 1. V'analoi, the Rebbe Rashab responded, B'yom Rishon d'Chag HaShavuos. The answer is that this happened on the first day. The yahrzeit of the Baal Shem Tov is on the first day of Shavuos. So then Reb Leivik persisted and he asked the following question. So he asked the Rebbe Rashab, Haloi b'yom rishon sarich lis'askus goyim. If one passes away on the first day of Shavuos, presumably that means they're going to be buried on the first day of Shavuos as well. That means that according to halacha, non-Jews have to be involved in the burial process. Hainu, namely, chafiras kever, digging the grave, ulachamim hamayim, and to heat the water, v'lases ha'aron, and to build a coffin. And what's the problem with that? How could it be that someone as holy as the Baal Shem Tov would have passed away on the first day, which means would have been buried on the first day, which means non-Jews would have been involved in his burial? Such a holy person, that should not have been the way he was buried. It's so unnatural. It's such an unnatural way for the Baal Shem Tov's biography to conclude is by being buried by non-Jews. So this is the question that Reb Leivik is asking the Rebbe Rashab, almost as if to say, isn't there merit in the other tradition? Isn't there merit in the tradition that says that he passed away on the second day, because on the second day you don't have any of these problems? Okay. So in order to understand fully what Reb Leivik was asking and the difference between the first day and the second day, we are going to take a deep dive into this sugya of burial on Yom Tov, and we're going to spend looking at some of the primary sources of this, and then we'll return to his question and what the Rebbe Rashab answered to this question. The Gemara in Maseches Be'ah Davav Amar Aleph says as follows. Amar Rava says, Meis, when we're dealing with a corpse, so b'Yom Tov Rishon, if it's the first day of Yom Tov, Yis'asku boy amamim, Gentiles should be involved in the burial. On Shabbos, when there's a mace on Shabbos, we don't have Gentiles involved in the burial. We sit tight. We don't do anything. Why? Because Amir al-Nachri telling a non-Jew to do a malacha for us, Kfur is a malacha, we don't do that on Shabbos. However, Chazal didn't ban, Amir al-Nachri is a din d'Rabbanan, they didn't ban Amir al-Nachri for this purpose on the first day of Yom Tov, so the burial happens through non-Jews. They're the ones who get, who do the burial. B'Yom Tov Sheni, however, if we're dealing with a corpse and it's the second day of Yom Tov, then Yis'asku bo Yisrael. Then Jews should be involved in this burial. Remember, the second day of Yom Tov is only the Rabbanon, because it's only there because it's fake of the Yoma, where it's a minig, where Chazal said, keep the minig of observing the second day, even though we know pretty much what the calendar is supposed to look like. And so therefore there's an extra kula, that whereas on the first day only non-Jews should do the burial, on the second day of Yom Tov, Jews can go ahead and do the burial. This is the statement of Rava. Amar Mar Zutra, we have the Amoira Mar Zutra comes and he qualifies this ruling. What's the qualification that he offers? Loi Amran, this din only applies, which din? The Pashtus, the simplest reading, and this is what Rashi tells us to read over here. The idea that Jews are going to be involved on day number 2 only applies elo di ishtahi. That only applies when we're dealing with a corpse that's already been delayed in burial. And so you're dealing here with a corpse day 2, day 3. This is already going to start not looking pretty. There's going to be it's going to be very uncomfortable. So that's where we say second day of Yom Tov bury, and who should bury? The Jews. Avolo ishtahi. If we're not dealing with that, the person just passed away, it's a fresh corpse, so then what's the rush to bury right now? And so therefore, Mashinale might as well just wait till after Yom Tov and get it done after Yom Tov. This is the qualification that Mar Zutra says. Rav Ashi disagrees. Rav Ashi says, no qualifications. The second day of Yom Tov, a Yid buries. Nami loy mashin ole. We're not going to wait, even if it's a fresh corpse. No big deal. We'll wait till tomorrow. My time. Why? Yom Tov sheni legabe meis kechol shavyua rabbanan. The second day of Yom Tov, when we're facing the reality that there's a corpse that needs to be buried, the Rabbanan said, today is not Yom Tov. Today is not Yom Tov when this is the reality we're dealing with. Afilu lemegas leglima, even to cut out, to sew, to prepare a cloak, ulemegas layasa, and to cut hadasim, which Rashi explains is not central to the burial process. You need tachrichim, you don't need this extra cloak. You don't need hadasim, which is only there to add a smell to make it more pleasant. Aval became so, even though it's not crucial, but remember Chazal said, today it's not Yom Tov. Treat it like a regular weekday, legabe the mace. This is Rav Ashi, and therefore he disagrees with Mar Zutra's statement. One last shita in this Gemara is Ravina. Ravina was a Talmud of Rav Ashi, and he survived after Rav Ashi's passing. And he writes about this saying, Omar Ravina, veha'idna today, meaning Rav Ashi, I theoretically agree with his psak. Jews should go ahead and they should do the burial on the second day, even if it's not an emergency, even if you could theoretically delay to the next day, go 100%. However, va'idna, we have a problem. What's the problem? Te'iko chabare. We ask chabare. What's chabare? Rashi here teaches that there was a nation that was neighboring with the Jews in Babylonia. Rashi writes, Umar Risha Shahoyu B'mei Parsiim. And they would basically persecute Jews. Part of the persecution of the Jews is, you need to work for me. So what did the Jews do? The Jews would say, oh, but today's a Yom Tov. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, fine, we'll do whatever labor you want us to do. But on a Yom Tov, you can't ask us to work for you on a Yom Tov. So they had a religious exemption. So now what's going to happen if on the second day of Yom Tov, the Jews are burying the mace? So the Chabarim are going to say, this nation, Rashi is saying, they're going to say, hey, you're violating Yom Tov. So you violated Yom Tov for those purposes, you violate Yom Tov for our purpose. So therefore, in order to sustain our religious exemption from the Chabarim, we have no choice but to say that we're not going to do this today. Tosfos differs with Rashi in Maseches Shabbos and says that it wasn't a nation. It was within the context of the Talmud Bavli, where the Amoraim were living in that place, in the Persian Empire, where there was a group of people who were the theologians, the radical theologians of the Zoroastrians, and they were the people. Okay, not an afkamina exactly who these people are. The bottom line is that this was the concern. So Ravina says, in principle, I agree with the din. However, we have to adjust because of the fact that we have this new reality, and so therefore the Jews should not be involved in the Kfura on the second day. Who should do it on the second day? Again, turn to the Gentiles. Just like on the first day, you're going to have the Gentiles do it, so on the second day, this is what should be done. All right, now, that's only during this crisis generation where you have the Chabare who are persecuting Jews. So Tosfos notes that Hashta Bizman Hazeh She'ein Chabare. We don't have this problem. We're not living under people who are persecuting us, and this chash doesn't exist. So mutter. So basically, Ravina's din falls off, and we go back to the base din, meaning the baseline din of Rav Ashi. Now Tosfos now has to deal with the following. He said, one second. The Gemara Paskin, Ravina had the last word, and Ravina said Chayshinan, which means what? A Jew doesn't go ahead and make the burial. So maybe you should say Talmud Bavli, to use the language of the Rambam in his Akdamat HaMishnah Torah, Talmud Bavli is binding on all of world Jewry. What part of Talmud Bavli? There's a lot of opinions. The Maskanas of the Talmud Bavli. Who had the last word on this subject? Ravina. Ad Kedei Hach, the Rambam says that a psak in the Gemara basically is just as if the Sanhedrin said something. So imagine the Sanhedrin gives a psak din. They get together, they gather together. In Talmudic language, it's called. They engaged in a minyan. They voted, and they said you're not allowed to do a certain activity. So then that's the final word. You don't get to start making your own cheshbonos whether you're going to keep that law or not. So says Tosfos, one would say same thing here. Ravina said, now that we have the Chabare, Jews don't bury on the second day of Yom Tov, and so that's the last word of the Gemara. So maybe this is something that we need to be careful about. Says Tosfos, no. This was only due to a technicality. The technicality isn't present anymore, and so therefore the gzeira isn't here anymore. And he brings an example of the issue of mayim megulin. What's mayim megulin? The Gemara says that a cup of water that was left out overnight, one shouldn't drink it. Why? We're afraid that a snake is going to place poison into the cup of water. And then in the time of the Rishonim, they weren't being careful about this. The Gemara has the last word, so who are you to come and disagree with the Gemara? Yeah, but the Gemara was said it due to a technical reason. That technical reason no longer applies, and so therefore we don't need to observe it. And so what is Tosfos doing over here? Tosfos basically wants to knock out Ravina's worry, to bring us back to say that today we could follow the Iker Hadin in the Gemara. Now there is one more issue that needs to be resolved, because there's one more Gemara where it does look like, hold on, put on the brakes before we have Jews burying on the second day of Yom Tov. So what is this Gemara? Shabbos Daf Kuf Lametes Amid Aleph and Amid Beis has the following account. There was people in the town of Bashkar, and they sent a question to the Amoira Levi asking him, what is the din, amongst other questions, with a meis b'Yom Tov? How does the burial work? Levi passed away, and Levi did not manage to answer this question. So Rav Menashe stepped up, and he's the one who responded to them. And what did he respond? Lo yisasku bei lo Yehudoim v'lo Armoin, not Jews, not Gentiles, lo b'Yom Tov Rishon v'lo b'Yom Tov Sheni, not on the first day, not on the second day. So the Gemara asks, why not? That goes against the din of Rava. Rava clearly ruled, first day Gentiles, second day Jews. And here we have the statement, no burial whatsoever. How did they paskin hepech hadin? So the Gemara answers, Lefi she'enom b'nei Torah, that we are dealing here with, in Bashkar, an unlearned population, and there's always that worry that if you show a loophole to an unlearned population, they're going to say, you're allowed to ask a goy to bury on the first day of Yom Tov, so I'm going to ask a goy to do other malachas. I'm allowed to go ahead and bury on the second day of Yom Tov, so I'm allowed to go ahead and do my own malacha on the second day of Yom Tov. There's always that concern that an exception to the rule is going to become the rule. So because they were in Bnei Torah, so therefore the Rav, and this is, Psak works this way. Psak isn't only what does the book say. And this is a good example, a good case study. Psak is also what's going to lead this community to a better place in Yerushalayim. And so in this case, it meant not following the halacha, telling them no burial the first day, no burial on the second day. But here again, we're dealing here with a very unique circumstance. Any average reader of the Gemara would say, okay, that's in Bashkar. That's an exception in Bashkar. Everywhere else, where we aren't dealing with such amaratzim or people who are prone to misunderstand things, we would follow the default din of the Gemara. After all, Rava said a din for a reason. Rav Ashi said a din for a reason. Even Mar Zutra, who qualified it a little, still he said his din for a reason. So obviously, Bashkar is the exception. So in other words, we have a rule and we have two exceptions. But what we've just done is we kind of want to move those exceptions off the table so they're no longer clouding our vision. One exception was the issue of the Chabare. We remove that from the table. That's not bothering us. Another exception is the exception of Bnei Bashkar She'enam Bnei Torah. Here again, we remove that from the equation. What does that leave us with? That leaves us with the Etzem Din. What is the Etzem Din? Meis b'Yom Tov Rishon, non-Jews. Meis b'Yom Tov Sheni, the Jewish people. There was Mar Zutra saying, if you could get away with not doing it on Yom Tov, then maybe do that. But remember, Rav Ashi said no, and usually Rav Ashi is the one who has the final word, and so therefore it's no surprise to find that the Rambam is going to rule in accordance with Rav Ashi in this way. Let's see how the Rambam summarizes the halacha. The mace, a corpse for Yom Tov Rishon, on the first day of Yom Tov, Yisasku b'kfurasei hagoyim, non-Jews. V'Yom Tov Sheni, on the second day of Yom Tov, Yisasku b'Yisrael. V'oisen le'kol tzrachav. And the Jews do everything that you need. In other words, even things that are extras. Remember we saw before, even the perfume, things that aren't crucial, you do it all. Why? Because the second day of Yom Tov is counted is regarded as a weekday when we have a mace. This is the Rambam giving us the Psak Din. There's no reference to Bashkar. Why would the Rambam codify something about Bashkar, which was an exception about one unique community? There's no mention here a chash of Chabore. Why would the Rambam codify something about Chabore, also an exception? And the Rambam pushes away Mar Zutra's qualification and follows the basic din of the Gemara of Rava and Rav Ashi. And indeed, as far as we can tell, the Rishonim in Sfar, that is in Spain, they all follow this psak. This was the psak, and not only do they talk about it as this is the correct psak, they also talk about it as this is the minig that is follows. This is how Jews are behaving in Spain. A good example of this is the Rashba, who writes as follows: this is the custom in all places. Now, Rashba wasn't in all places, but he means all places he was aware of, which is in Spain. This askik boy amam and Gentiles do it on the first day. Of Yom Sheni, even Jews do it. Even if it isn't a corpse that's been around for a few days, and so therefore it's not an emergency to get it in the ground. Nonetheless, this is what we do. Even a real malacha d'oraisa, like digging, mamash isa d'oraisa, it's fine. We're going to do that on the second day. There's no qualifications, no exceptions over here, as opposed to what we're going to see soon. No new interpretations. Very straightforward. You're able to see that the Jews in Spain are following Din of the Gemara without any twists and turns. However, when we move a little north and east to the Jews that were living in other areas, in Ashkenaz, France, and Germany, we're going to see that although it seemed pretty clear that our Gemara was going in one direction, they pulled in another direction. And what we're going to see is as follows. First, I'm going to show you a major chumrah that was introduced that does not seem to be the pshutoy of the Gemara, a big chumrah Rabbeinu Tam. And on the other hand, at the same time, there was a major kula that was introduced. So first we're going to do the chumrah, then we're going to do the kula. Tosfos in Maseches Be'ada Vav Amar Aleph says as follows: despite everything that is mashma from the Gemara, Rabbeinu Tam ayo oiser. Rabbeinu Tam's forbidding. As we're going to see later, it's going to become clear. Rabbeinu Tam forbids a Jew to do the kfura on the second day. We'll fine tune that perhaps a little in a moment. But for right now, this idea that a Jew, din of the Gemara, a Jew does it on the second day. No, Rabbeinu Tam says no. There was a story in Malun. If you were ever in Berwa, you were 25 minutes away from Malun. It's very, very close. In fact, the RER train that goes from Paris to that stops through goes through Berwa. I think the last stop is Malun. So there was a Jewish kehillah there in the 1100s. And Meis Adam Echad b'Yom Tov Sheni, there was a Jew who died on the second day of Yom Tov. V'ratu l'asik b'lo kavrei, they wanted to be involved in burying him, which is what the Gemara told them to do. V'gar b'hem Rabbeinu Tam was very upset of them. V'shalach lem, and he sent them a message. B'nei Bashkar einam b'nei Torah. V'atam b'nei Torah? Hold on a second. Remember that story in Gemara Shabbos where it said this B'nei Bashkar and how they said to them, although the din of the Gemara is you're allowed to bury, you guys shouldn't do anything because you're going to become mezalzel and Yom Tov and all that. So one second, they were in B'nei Torah, they were Amaratim, and you guys are better than them? This is the question that Rabbeinu Tam was saying. In other words, I don't see this as him attacking this local community, saying that they are no goodniks. It's not so much an attack on them. Because remember, Rabbeinu Tam asks for everyone. Rabbeinu Tam is basically saying that just like there was once a concern with Bashkar, we have that concern today for all of Am Yisrael. That if we're going to follow this din in the Gemara and allow burial on the second day, just like then there was a worry in Bashkar, this is going to lead to Zilzal and Yom Tov, today there's a worry all over, that in many places. And so therefore it's better for Judaism if we no longer have this direct Jewish engagement in a burial on the second day of Yom Tov. Avo, the Ri Reb Yitzchak, who, by the way, is Rabbeinu Tam's nephew. The Ri's mother was a sibling of Rabbeinu Tam. The Ri says, no. You can't use that Gemara to say, if Bashkar couldn't do it, we can't do it. You can't. Don't go there. Why? Because really, if you look at the Gemara, you'll see numerous occasions it comes up where there's a psak given that goes against the actual halacha, and the reason is for this concern. Einam b'nei Torah, they're not Yirei Shamayim. They're going to take advantage of this heter, and it's not going to lead to good places. This comes up in other contexts. For example, the din of bishul akum. So there is a certain vegetable that's discussed in the Gemara Yavamis, and Rav Yochanan paskined that, you need to be nizer in it, mishum bishul akum. You shouldn't eat it, even though it's not oil al shulchan malachim. And we know the din, if it's not oil al shulchan malachim, so then it's okay. You don't have to worry about it. Afal became the Gemara Yavama says that Yochanan answered. Why did he answer? Because of this concern. Einam b'nei Torah, if they're going to find out about this, they're going to start spinning other things of Yiddishkeit, and it's not going to be good for kashrus, so let's not do it. Now, let me ask you a question that he says. Do we follow the heter of that if it's not oil al shochem malachim, then it's exempt from these din? Yeah, we follow that. So what do you see? This concept of, if in the Gemara a certain town was Einam b'nei Torah, today we automatically apply that universally to the entire Jewish world. We clearly see that we don't paskin that way when it comes to this bishul achum. And so therefore Ri, the nephew, says that he disagrees with what Rabbeinu Tam is saying. Now, Rabbeinu Yechiel, who's another French Tosfos. All these Rabbanim, by the way, are in France. Malun is in France. Rabbeinu Tam is in France. The Ri is in France. Rabbeinu Yechiel is known as Rabbi Yechiel of Paris. He lives in the 1200s. So he says, no. Maybe it could be mechalik. There's two types. Any one of these issues that come up in the Gemara, where the loophole is going to be, or the exception is going to be in public, then we should be nizar in it today. Because those are really, really touchy. A burial is in public. So therefore, if Bashkar couldn't do it, we shouldn't do it. Bishul Akum, there it's okay for us to say, we don't have to worry. There, Taka was a problem. We don't have to worry so much about it because it happens in the privacy of your home, and so therefore the stakes are lower, and so therefore don't worry about it. And so Rabbi Yechiel is basically siding with the Rabbeinu Tam, saying that, just like Bnei Bashkar wasn't allowed to do a burial, so we shouldn't be allowed to do a burial on the second day of Yom Tov. Then Rabbeinu Tam in this Tosfos says another factor why it wants to aser. Remember, there were two Gemaras that I moved off of the table. I said they were disturbing us. They were clouding our vision. One was the Bnei Bashkar Gemara and Gemara Shabbos, and the other one was the Gemara in Bey about the Chabare. So Rabbeinu Tam brought the Bashkar back. Now he's going to bring the Chabare back too. He says, guess what? The Bezman Hazeh, today, we have Yehudim She'em Meshubadim L'Malchus L'Asas Malacha. They're drafted in one way or another to work for the government. Kegoin L'Kabel Amas, they're tax collectors, Ulis Asik B'Tzorchem, and they're doing other business for the government. There are always Jews in these regions who are involved on one level or another in government. And they always have to say, by the way, this Tuesday and Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday, I'm not available, it's Yom Tov. And you can imagine that the lords or the barons and the kings weren't so thrilled about this. In Yiru, she's askulasis malach b'meis. If they're going to find out that you did on the second day of Yom Tov that you buried a dead body, yachufois and lasis malach l'malchos. So they're going to say, no, you could do the burial, you can't come work for me. And so therefore, really, the Chabare Gemara is relevant. And here we see what Rabbeinu Tam is doing. He takes both of these the Gemaras. He brings the Bashkar Gemara back. He brings the Chabare Gemara back, and he wants to reach a place where basically the heter of a yid, the mitzvah of a yid, to do the kfur on the second day of Yom Tov is going to be removed. Now what's very interesting is this teaching in Tosfos and this story with the people of Melun is quoted by many different versions of Tosfos and by many different Rishonim, and each one has another twist to the story. It's mamish interesting. We're going to do two more, and really you could do a lot more. We're just going to do two more because these two are going to give us interesting additional insight here. So now let's go to Tosfos and Shabbos, Taf Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Beis. Here, it's obviously a different collection of Tosfos. This collection of Tosfos comes from Reb Shimshon Mishatz. Ma'aseh Haya, the story is, Vaylichu meis chutz l'tchum b'Yom Tov. They took the corpse out of the Tchum on Yom Tov. We're supposed to remain in the Tchum on Yom Tov. They took it out. Why? Because presumably there wasn't a Jewish cemetery where the person died, and so they had to take him elsewhere. Now people went on horses. Yidden are on horses. To be part of the funeral or to be directly involved. And Rabbeinu Tam got really upset. Even those who didn't mount horses. The Shama Rebbe, and my teacher, who's the Ri, understood that what was Rabbeinu Tam's reason? The Tamoy Mishum, the Masik Ravana Inodika Chabare. Remember Ravina said that now that there's Chabari, we need to worry. So for us, though we don't have Chabari today, remember I said before, don't treat this as a din, like the Sanhedrin ruled and it's the last word. It was just a technicality. Tosfos said that. Rabbeinu Tam here is saying not so fast. Not so fast. You have a din that's issued in the Gemara. It's the final statement, even if the rationale is no longer relevant. Halacha doesn't work that way. You don't get to say, the reason no longer applies, and so therefore we get to pull away the din. It doesn't work that way. This is what Ravinu said is the final word. It's as if the Sanhedrin has spoken. You need to bring back a Sanhedrin in order to overturn that. We obviously don't have a Sanhedrin today. We don't have another Talmud Bavli to overturn the first one, and so therefore this is not on the table. That's number one. Number two, he brings the other two rationales that we saw in the prior Tosfos. Number 2 is, the barons over here and the other leaders, they're going to force Jews to work on Yom Tov if they see us doing this. And finally, Bnei Bashkar aren't Bnei Torah. Bnei Melun is Bnei Torah. So those are the 3 here. Rather than 2, there are 3 arguments for why Rabbeinu Tam said he didn't like this. One last thing, the Tosfos of Rabbeinu Peretz here quotes an interesting ending to the story that's not too exciting, where basically he writes that Rabbeinu Tam added, and he said, Tamani, after saying, so Bashkar they are in Torah, and Melun is Torah, he said, Tamani im loy techara ve'ir. So Rabbeinu Tam, according to this tradition, actually was so enraged by the behavior, even though, remember, they're following Din of the Gemara. They're following Din of the Gemara, and as we know, the Rashba said that was the minig in Spain. Rabbeinu Tam was so upset by this that he actually issued a curse. And Amru, the tradition is that that indeed there was some sort of fire in the town of Melun sometime thereafter. So what was Rabbeinu Tam's shita? This gets clarified. We know that he was upset about Melun. What did he want? So the Agoyes Maimonides in Hilchos Yom Tov tells us what he wanted. Rabbeinu Tam wanted as follows. When Gentiles are available, Pasak Rabbeinu Tam, that's when Rabbeinu Tam says, the Asur L'Koivre Yisrael Afilu B'Yom Tov Sheni, a Jew is not allowed to do this on the second day. However, it's not a complete ban, but I'm a min shari, you're allowed to use these Gentiles. Amnam, the Ri holds that Shari B'Yom Tov Sheni Yisrael, on the second day, it is permitted for a Jew to do this. This is Rabbeinu. So what did we learn now? What did we clarify? Rabbeinu Tam's psak is as follows. Second day of Yom Tov, he's not going all the way, no. But he's saying if there are Gentiles available, you have to rely on the Gentiles to do the second day. And by the way, some of the Rishonim say, what does it mean if they're available, if not? So one of them gives a heichi timtza. What does it mean they're not available? If it's their holiday. If their holiday, they're not going to be available. So then Rabbeinu Tam even then will be okay. B'shas Adchak will say go ahead and do a second day. That wasn't the situation in Melun. And that's what is bothering him. Did all of the Rabbanim in France accept this? Clearly not. The Ri, his nephew, didn't accept this. We see in these passages. And the people in Melun didn't accept this. They wanted to follow Din of the Gemara. Rabbeinu Tam introduced this very big, very significant chumrah. What's motivating Rabbeinu Tam? I think it's from the sources. He wants to make sure that the Yidden are going to keep Yom Tov, and he thinks that this type of exception is going to lead to a little bit of a zilzul in Shmiras Yom Tov, and so this is probably what's motivating him to bring these different pieces of the Gemara that we knocked off of the table, to bring them back on, to tell us that we should not do the burial on the second day. Now what's amazing is that at the same time that this chumrah is developing by Rabbeinu Tam, there is a kula developing in different region, not in the same region, not in the region of France, but in 2 adjacent areas. One at this same period in Germany, and then soon thereafter in Provence. So let's first read what happens in Germany. Ravan, Rabbi Eliezer ben Nosson, Imamish lived during the times of Rabbeinu Tam, but further east, he's living in Germany, in Mainz. And look what he writes. V'yom tov sheni k'chol u'etzer ames, lachbar l'arkever v'chol tzar chemes. The second day, it's a weekday. There's no hint of any chumrah of Rabbeinu Tam over here. The second day, it's a weekday. You do whatever you want for the mess. Okay, but it's not only that he didn't have Rabbeinu Tam's chumrah. Look what he does have. The Yom Tov v'rishin yasu goyam hakoil. On the first day of Yom Tov, non-Jews should do everything. Okay, that sounds like Din of the Gemara so far. But now continue reading. When I just said that goyim should do hakoil, hold on. Don't run away with that. Yisrael, Jews should be involved too. What should they do? Yoitzi uhu, they should carry the corpse out. V'yisa uhu ad lekever, they should carry the corpse to the grave. V'yitnuhu bekever, they should place it in the grave. V'hagoyim yechasu, the non-Jews should do the covering. They should return the dirt into the grave. In other words, what's he want to say over here? He wants to say anything that's not a malacha d'oraisa, you could go ahead on the first day and you could do. So for example, tiltul ames is not asam midaraisa. It's not one of the 39 malachas, tiltul ames, moving a dead body. However, it is muksa. It's a derabana. Okay, beseder. We're mater muksa. You could go ahead and do it. What about hoitzah? Hoitzah is a deraisa. You're not allowed to do hoitzah. So you say, yeah, but on Yom Tov you're allowed to carry. It's not so pashut. Haitzah is mutter for oichel nefesh. It's extended also for tzarchei hana, any other bodily gain that a person has. They're allowed to do haitzah. So the Ravan went on to say, yeah, but it's also mutter for mitzvah. And this is a mitzvah. And so therefore, burial is a mitzvah, you're allowed to even do the act of haitzah. But returning the earth onto the ground, there's no heter, into the grave, there's no heter for that. And so that's what we shouldn't do on the first day of Yom Tov. So rather than a chumrah, I'm calling it a kula in the sense of saying, the Gemara said, Yasku boy goyim, which sounds to me as a reader, this Gentiles do the whole thing from A to Z. And what we see, the Ravan, Rabbi Eliezer ben Nassan Halevi, writing sometime in the 1100s in Germany, saying, hold on, there's a whole list of things that the Yidden should do on the first day, and the non-Jews only do a small a number of things. Now, this issue came to a head in Provence. This is a little later. This is in the 1200s, late 1200s, early 1300s, in a sefer that is called Magen Avis. There are a number of books that are called Magen Avis, the same title. This one was produced by a man, Reb Menachem HaMeiri. Reb Menachem HaMeiri wrote the sefer Magen Avis. He basically describes in the introduction as follows. He says, we're living here in various towns in Provence, southern France, and we have our minhagim, we have our way of living. Everything's been good and wonderful. However, in recent years, there's been some immigration of Jews coming from Spain. Not entirely clear what was the impetus for this immigration wave sometime in the early 1200s from Spain north into Provence. And all of a sudden they look at our minhagim. And you know what they were doing in Spain. The Rashba told us what the minig was. The minig was on the first day, goyim. Goyim what? Everything. Goyim did everything. And the Ramban writes that also. That was a minig in Sfard. All of a sudden they come, they see a Yid passes away the first day of Yom Tov, and the Yidden are involved. Never that. They're taking him out and they're doing the Tara and they're doing this and that. Only things that are Malacha D'Oraisa, that there's no way to say you could do it, that they have non-Jews do. And this, they get upset by this and they say this is wrong. And this was one thing. There were others as well. So the Meiri wrote a sefer of the debates that he had with these Talmudim, that he calls the Svardisha Talmudim, the Talmudim from Spain, defending the Minhagim. So Inyan Vav is this issue. Inyan Vav is this issue. And he writes that we've always had this custom. They came, they made an error, they said this is terrible, how can you guys do this? So he responds as follows. Namti lahem. Look at number 15, this is the first paragraph, look at the second to last line. Namti lahem. So I responded to them and I said as follows. By the way, the sefer is called Magen Avis. He writes in the Akdama, defending the tradition of my ancestors here in Provence that had these minhagim. Namti lem, so I told them, Al kapanim shmu azulay dibra ela chafiras hakever. When the Gemara said goyim on the first day, it was narrowly speaking about the act of actually digging a grave. That a Yid is not allowed to do. Why? It's a malacha d'oraisa, so there's no way to get around that. How do you get around that? But anything that has a way around it, which is either Issa D'Rabbanan or something like Haitzah, but there's a heter because Haitzah l'tzarech mitzvah is mutter, so then we're going to go ahead and we're going to do it. So he wants to say that that's the pshat in the Gemara when it said first day Gentiles. What does it mean? It means only chafiras hakever. So now they come along and they have another taina back. They're like, why are you doing this? What gives you a right to say all these Isuri D'Rabbanan are pushed off on the first day of Yom Tov? What gives you a right to say? You're saying, because kavod abriyas. And we do say taka, kavod abriyas, dignity of a human being, could push off a Issa D'Rabbanan. So that's what you're trying to say? But they had a taina. You're not really granting this person kavod abriyas, real dignity. Why? Because although the Yid is doing the Tara, and although the Yid is taking the nifter to the Beis HaKvaris and doing all those things, but at the end of the day, there are still Gentiles involved in the process. And the act of Kvura, the digging of the grave and then the returning of the dirt on top of the corpse in the ground, that is being done by a non-Jew. So you're saying, kavod abriyas, so we're allowed to bring Jewish involvement. But the same disgrace is still happening. So you're not really accomplishing anything, so your heta really goes away. So he answers, you think there's a problem, that it's not good because of the fact that the Gentiles dig the grave and they're the ones who return the dirt. They don't touch the corpse. But Hoitzah, taking it out, V'tiltul, and moving it around, Urechitza, and washing it, Yesh behem Negiah B'gufay, that's touching the corpse, and Harei says Zilzulay, that's a zilzul if Gentiles do it, and so therefore we do solve the problem of this disgrace by overriding these Isurei Derabanan on the first day of Yom Tov, and we successfully do so. We preserve the Nifter's dignity by having fellow Jews of the community, people he lived with, he davened with, he fabreng with, having them do it. This is their dignity. The grave, who cares about? I don't really care so much about the digging of the grave, the covering of the dirt. That's not close contact. And so therefore our heter makes a lot of sense. Here, by the way, is where we learn what was the impetus behind this heter. I told you the impetus behind Rabbeinu Tam's Chumrah B'Pashtus was we want to make sure Jews are observing Yom Tov and we don't lead to a Zilzul Yom Tov. What's the impetus here? The impetus here is you just passed away, and it's hard to see that the people, the loved ones, and others, extended family, the community, are not going to be the ones to bring him to his final resting place. It's going to be other people who aren't even part of the community. They're Gentiles, and they're coming in direct contact with it just didn't sit right. It doesn't sit right emotionally with the people, not the Rabbanim. It doesn't sit right with the people, and I think that's where the impetus for this heter came. And we saw in the 1100s, Ravan told us about this heter, and now we see that in Provence, in Meiri, late 1200s, early 1300s, also talking about this heter. Now it continues. The Magen Avos continues a very long piece, very interesting. We're just looking at a few passages. So they came back and they said, hold on, the Ravid was the Marad Asra in Provence, Rabbi Avram ben David, the one who's famously critiques the Rambam in numerous places. And there was a Maisa with the Ravid, that once there was a Yid who passed away on the first day of Yom Tov, and the Ravid said, hold off, don't let the Gentiles bury him today, we're going to have the Jews do it tomorrow. What do you see from this story? You see from this story that the Ravid was essentially saying, if we do it today, it's going to be Gentiles. That implies that there wasn't Jewish involvement. If there was Jewish involvement to the extent that you guys are doing, then what's the justification for the Ravid to have delayed it from one day to another? Is a raya that the Ravid disagrees with you guys and agrees with us. Namti lahem, I responded, page 4, the 5th line. Harav Moiri Shayam Talmid of my teacher, the Meiri says, was a student of the Ravid. And he told me, hey, B'Shem Rabbi Seinu, he told us in the name of our teachers, they were there, that we're not dealing with a regular person. It was a Adam Gadol Masuyima, it was a very specific and a very great man. The Loiratza and the Ravid didn't want, she's asku af b'chafiras kivrei el Yisrael. So for this great man, they went this extra step. They didn't want that even the grave should be dug by non-Jews, even the dirt to be returned by non-Jews they didn't want. And that's why the Ravid suspended it from one day to another day. But the Ravid doesn't disagree with us that if they would have done it that day, then Jews would have been involved in all these other things. Next paragraph. They come back with another taina. At the end of the day, is there a shitta that's more machmir? Shouldn't we always say, let's go with the stricter opinion? That's what let's go with the stricter opinion. So you're saying you're justified. But we are saying Jews should not be involved at all on day one. Shouldn't you follow the more strict opinion? So he responds as follows. Namti lahem. Bamed dvaram amurim, when do we say we follow the stricter opinion? Bizman sha'ashonin kitikunon, when time was normal. V'yisrael shruyim bebitcha, and Jews are dwelling securely. Aval achsha ba'avoynesenu, now unfortunately, nispashet ha'golus harbe, the golus has been exacerbated. The rabu atzores, and persecution has become more extensive. Uva artzes halalu, and therefore in these lands, in Provence, ein lanu amamim, we don't have Gentiles, tehei yodenu shaletas alein, that we control, lahavias amesim shalanu le'enei kol shichneim, to bring our dead in front of all their neighbors. What's he saying here? You think finding a Gentile to do the whole process is easy? It's not so easy. You come to a guy, you say, I'll offer you money. They say, I don't want to do this. Why? Because they look at me on the street, my neighbors, and they say, oh, you're working for the Jews? You're doing their grave work for them? And so if we was in Eretz Yisrael and we had other people, then we're in control and we're powerful, so then maybe we could do it, but that's not reality today. In other words, don't make chumras on us. It's sometimes not so easy to find non-Jews. This is what he's saying here. It's very interesting. Then he goes, what about, but you are using Gentiles. using them to dig the grave. He says, yeah, that's easier. Finding one to dig the grave, that's enough. Why? That happens outside of the city. The cemeteries are outside the city. So you go to a non-Jew, you say you're willing to dig a grave, you can find one to do it. But go to a non-Jew and say you're going to take the body and you're going to take it down from the bed and you're going to do the rechitza and then you're going to do the tara and then you're going to do all this. You're not going to find, and so therefore we don't want to go with the chumrah. He then adds, by the way, oh, you want to go with chumras? There's a yid called Rabbeinu Tam who lives not too far away from here. You guys in Spain, you don't follow Rabbeinu Tam's chumrah, right? What did the Spanish do the second day? Yisrael do everything, right? Jews did everything the second day. So you're not really honest when you say we should follow every strict position because you guys didn't take Rabbeinu Tam's chumrah. Okay, now what's interesting is that so simultaneously we have a kula for the first day. A kula for the first day, Jews could be involved, Germany and Provence. A chumrah for the second day, controversial, but it develops Rabbeinu Tam in France. And then what eventually happens is that these get merged one way or another. So let's see how this happens. This was obviously a process, but let's see the end of the process in the Shulchan Aruch. Paskins the Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim Simin Tov Kuf Chavav. Meis hamutal lakavrei if we need to bury someone. Imu b'yom tov rishon if it's the first day of Yom Tov. Yisasku boy amamin Gentiles. Okay, that is a din. Gentiles need to do with the first day. Now remember, the first day you have the heter of who? The Ravan's heter, which was used in Provence as well. The Mechaber of Yosef Karo brings this. When do we say the Gentiles should do it? It's making the grave and building a oren, melacha d'oraisa. The tachrichin actually creating the shrouds, that's also malacha d'oraisa. Avalal bishoy, dressing him, ulachamam loimayim letaroi, and to heat water. So heat water, it's permitted because of the fact that we're allowed to make water for drinking. Uloitzioi, taking him out, again permitted because hoitzah for hana is mutter, and hoitzah for a mitzvah is mutter. Ulasumu bekever, and actually putting him in the grave, mutter al yidei Yisrael. An amazing thing happened here. You know, they say that the Mechaber, there was the big three that he followed in Psak, the Rif, Rambam, and the Rosh. The Rif has none of this exception for the first day. Read the Rif in Maseches Beitza. He says very clearly. He gives Dinah the Gemara no exception. First day Gentiles, period. Rambam, first day Gentiles, period. Okay. The Rosh, however, did quote the minig of the Ravan, which was a heter. And often it's said that the Mechaber goes when 2 out of 3. Well, here you see, he didn't go 2 out of 3. He went with the Rosh. And the reason is because there are many other Rishonim, especially the ones from Provence, that had a big influence on Rabbi Yosef Karo, and they accepted this. And so therefore, he disregards the Rambam, disregards the Rif, embraces Ravan, embraces the Meiri, embraces this heter for the first day, and so all of a sudden now, what's codified in the Shulchan Aruch by Rabbi Yosef Karo is, first day Yom Tov is a blend, Jews and Gentiles involved in the burial. That's Sif Aleph. Sif Beis, what happens if one passes away on the first day of Yom Tov, says, and very importantly, you're not allowed to do what the Ravid did. Remember, we learned that the Ravid in one case said, I want Jews involved in the whole process, and so therefore he delayed to the next day. The Mechaber says this is not allowed. If you have the ability to do kfura, you need to do kfura right away, and we do not delay to the next day. What happens on Yom Tov Sheni? Yom Tov Sheni is asku bo Yisrael. Jews do it. Jews do it. Go to the end of this paragraph. The Yom Tov Sheni legabe meis kechol shavu rabbanon. He uses the words of Rav Ashi. The second day of Yom Tov, when we're dealing with a burial situation, for that person and for that scenario, it's as if it is weekday. Vafilu efshar ba'amim, even if Gentiles are available. Yisasku b'Yisrael, Jews, the second day. How does a Mechaber paskin? Does he accept Rabbeinu Tam? No. Rabbeinu Tam's chumrah is completely rejected. Is not brought at all. In fact, some of the language over here from the Mechaber, you're able to see he's battling with Rabbeinu Tam, saying, no, we did not accept this chumrah. Then on the second day we're worried and the Jews shouldn't do it. No. Second day the Jews should do it 100%. This is in terms of the Mechaber. However, Rabbeinu Tam did have influence. He did have influence, even though it was very controversial as chumrah in its day. It had an influence, and look what the Ramah adds in the Haggah, in Sif Dalid, in Simin Tov Kuf Chavav. Avo ba'Ashkenaz, however, in Ashkenaz in Germany, Uva Medina is Elu, and here in Poland, further east, Ein Noyagin Kain. This is not the custom. It is not the custom to have free license for a Jew to do anything on the second day of Yom Tov. So what is the custom? Kol Heicha de Efshar ba'Amamin, when we could use Gentiles, Oisin HaKever, and then they're going to do the grave. Ve'orin, and they're going to make the coffin. V'tachrichin, and they're going to make the shroud. Ayidei amin. In other words, anything that's a malacha de'eraisa on the second day of Yom Tov, they're going to do. Usharat varim, the other things, Oisin Yisraelim, that the Jews could do. Kamei be Yom Tov Rishon, just like Yom Tov Rishon. So it's a real, very interesting thing that happened here. Rabbeinu Tam, when he said no on the second day, it was one big no. No exceptions. No to everything. Jews should not be doing anything. There was no monkey business with his no. However, that never became really the accepted custom in all of Ashkenaz. Why? Because the Jews in Ashkenaz accepted the Ravan's heter. The Ravan's heter said on the first day Jews can be involved in everything. So in almost everything, in many things. So, and that was niskabel, and in fact we see that Rabbi Yosef Karo saying, even Rabbi Yosef Karo saying that was niskabel. So that was the default, Ravan's heter. So that's immutable. That if on the first day of Yom Tov you're doing certain activities, and by definition, obviously those are going to be mutter on the second day. So Rabbeinu Tam got added in that although there are certain things, all the things that we will do on the first day, we'll continue doing on the second day, but the other stuff that we don't do on the first day, that's where we'll accept Rabbeinu Tam, and we're not going to do those things. In other words, the Ramah is telling us that essentially there is no difference in Ashkenaz and in Poland. There is no difference between the first day and the second day. Clearly there was a difference in the Gemara. Now we're at a place where, oddly enough, due to the history of the Chumrah and the Kula, we're at a place right now where there is no difference between the first day and the second day, except for if Efshar ba'amamin. If there isn't any Gentiles available, so the first day, too bad. There's no Gentiles available the second day. So here, remember, Rabbeinu Tam said that in that case, he's going to allow Jews to do it. So that's a case where there will be a difference between the first day and the second day, where we're going to go ahead and we're going to have the Jews do it. As the Ramah concludes the paragraph, if we do not have the ability to hire Gentiles to do the kfur on the second day, then mutter lases hakol al yedei Yisrael. Okay. So now, let's come back to the Levi Yitzchak's shaila. What was his shaila? His shaila was, if you say that Baal Shem Tov was nostalgic on the first day, so then it means certain activities, if you notice, the specific ones that he's referring to there are the malachis de'eraisa. What are them? Chafiras kever, ulechamem hamayim, velasei sa'orin. Okay, interesting question about lechamem hamayim. I'm going to jump over that, but two of the three, he's asking about the things that are forbidden. In other words, he's taking into account the Ravan's heter. And the heter is certain things you're allowed to do, but certain things you're not. And if the Baal Shem Tov was installed on the first day, presumably he would have been buried on the first day, then we would have those problems. Isn't that an argument for the second day? But wait a second. If you're following the Ramah, there isn't really a difference between the first day and the second day. The second day would also be the same thing, essentially. So here is where I think, this is again a little bit of a guesswork, a little more research is needed here. It is very likely that although the Ramah writes that this is the minig, that there's basically no difference between the first day and second day, it could be that there were times and places, now we're in the 1700s in Poland, where that minig became less observed. And it could be that at least in some situations, they said, you know what, we're not going to observe that minig. And so Rabbeinu Tam's chumrah, therefore, for the second day is completely removed. Or it could be they said, Efshar. We don't have we didn't call them before Yom Tov. They didn't exist. They're not available. We only told them to be available the first day, whatever. And they qualified it as a matzav of Efshar. And that, I think, what was happening. I don't have exact evidence, but I assume that was what was happening, which is why that's what I believe Yitzchak's question is. His question is, if you say that he would have passed on the second day, then Jews could have been involved in the whole process, given what I just said. If, however, you say that it would have been on the first day, then there's no way around it, and Gentiles would have been involved in a lot of the process. What did the Rebbe Rashab respond to him? We saw the Rebbe Rashab said, no, it happened the first day. Okay, good, fine. So now we need to see as follows. What taka do the sources say about which day did he pass away? What did the Rebbe Rashab respond to the Levi Yitzchak's shaila over here? And when did the burial actually happen? So as follows. Sefer HaSichos Tafrei Sadik Tes, page 333. This is a Sikha from 1939. The Frierdiker Rebbe said as follows. In the year 1760, the passing of the Baal Shem Tov is the same kvias as this year in 1939, Wednesday and Thursday, which is the same as this year, Tafshin Pei Dalet, Wednesday and Thursday. Continue the Frierdiker Rebbe. It is not, we do not have a tradition when the Histalkus happened, whether it happened on the first day or on the second day. However, there is rayas that it happened on the first day. What is the proof that it happened on the first day? Because there was a phrase that Chassidim would say that the passing of the Baal Shem Tov is the day shenitlu boy ha'ma'oris, that the lights were removed. This is a pun on chapter 1 in the Torah, which speaks about the fourth day. Yom HaRevi was nitlu boy, they were hung up to shine, but if you change the tuf to a tes, you get removed. So Chassidim would say that the passing of the Baal Shem Tov was the day shenitlu boy ha'ma'oris, that the ma'oris were removed, so they were punning it Wednesday. It makes more sense that it was a Wednesday, and so now that's a proper context for this type of pun. And Shavuos, Wednesday, Thursday was that year, and the first day was Wednesday. In fact, always you cannot have the first day of Shavuos on. The second day of Shavuos can never be on a Wednesday, and so therefore, by definition, that is an evidence, he says, it's a raya that it happened on the first day. Perhaps, I'm not sure, but remember that Rebbe Rashab told Rebbe Leivik that it happened on the first day. Didn't explain. How does he know? Where did he get that information from? We don't know. But here we see in the Sikha that he says, we don't have a tradition, but there's a raya that it was the first day because of this Nitlu Bayam Oiris argument. So one could say that that's what the Rebbe Rashab was using as well when he answered Rebbe Leivik, or perhaps it was something else. We don't know, but you could say that. Okay. Now, mentioned before, and even here we see that there's doubt, right? The Frierdiker Rebbe himself was saying that he didn't have that there isn't a clear Kabbalah on this issue. Well, about 50 years ago, this doubt was conclusively resolved. Why is that? So there is a professor in Eretz Yisrael, his name is Yitzchak Alfasi. He studies and researches about Chassidus. He put out many, many different books on Chassidus. So interestingly, he sent to the Rebbe in Tafshin Chai, 1958, he sent to the Rebbe one of his books on Chassidus, and I mentioned over there, like it mentions in many Sfarim, the Baal Shem Tov passed away on the second day of Shavuos on Zion Sivan. So the Rebbe responded with a letter printed in the English Kodesh. By the way, it wasn't Zion Sivan, it was Vav Sivan. See the Sikha of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So he, interestingly, immediately accepted it. And the next year, in Tafshin Yutes, he published another one of his books, and there you can see he changed it. Vav Sivan, and he writes, this is what the Rebbe told me, and he writes a reference to the Sikha, so first day. Okay, fast forward to 1974, and basically he publishes an essay that says the following. There is a manuscript that has come to our attention, he writes, a siddur that came from the Beis Medrash of the Baal Shem Tov. The author of the siddur is a man by the name of Rebbe Avram Shimshon, who was a rabbi in Roshkov, and his father was very famous. His father was Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polnoya. Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polnoya was one of the famous students of the Baal Shem Tov, the author of the Sefer Tildas Yaakov Yosef. And his son had this manuscript siddur of the Tfilis. And it's now in Eretz Yisrael, and he examined it, and he writes that it has a colophon. And the colophon says that Nishlam Yutes Yaman L'Chodesh Sivan 19th of Sivan Shnas Tov Kuf Chof. That's amazing. That's a few days. He finished writing a siddur, mamish, a few days after the Baal Shem Tov passed away. And then there's a line in there that says, "V'kabalti mimoiri," I received from my teacher, Meirenu Harav Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. Shabavayneseinu Arabim Niftar Yom Aleph Teshvuos Shehu Yom Dalet Shnas Tov Kuf Chaf Leprat Koton. Here you have someone who was there at the time, a student of the Baal Shem Tov, a well-known figure who wrote in his siddur that the Baal Shem Tov passed away on the first day of Shavuos. So if you go back to that 1930 Sefer that presents a council of Hasidim the next year not being sure about when his yahrzeit was, I think this calls into question whether indeed that happened. And what the Frierdiker Rebbe was saying about the Raya, and what the Rebbe Rashab was saying when he told Rebbe Leivik that it happened the first day, I think now we can just say there is no reason for there to be any doubt anymore. As to why then did a doubt even surface in the first place, it's a good question, and we'll come back to that maybe in a second. But when was the burial? When was the actual burial of the Baal Shem Tov? So there's actually conflicting traditions. So there's a sefer that was printed as part of the Munkach community. Rabbi Chio Michal Gold, he was a Talmud of the Minchas Elazar, and in the sefer Darkei Chaim V'Sholem, he writes as follows: a lot of people think that it's a degradation to one's honor to be buried through a non-Jew on Yom Tov. Adarabah, Zeu Kvoido, it's the biggest honor. That what? That you follow halacha, and that with your body, the Poiskim's words were followed, and instead of going against the Poiskim, you followed the Poiskim. That's the best Kiddush Hashem you can make. That's a big schus. Then he goes on to say, Baal Shem Tov passed away on the first day of Shavuos. It's a mistake when people think it's the second day of Shavuos. And then he writes that he has a tradition that he heard from the Munkatcher, from the Minchas Elazar, that his Talmidim followed the din in Shulchan Aruch, and he was not buried via a Jew, but through a non-Jew. Presumably, Jews were involved in what they were permitted to do. So according to this tradition in Munkach, the Baal Shem Tov was buried Boi Bayoim on the first day of Shavuos. However, there's a different tradition. In the Nitei Gavriel, in Hilchos Yom Tov, in Chelek Aleph, he writes that he heard from the Skvera Rebbe. He means here Rabbi Yaakov Yosef Twersky was the Skvera Rebbe, passed away in Tovshin Chav Ches. He writes this, he has in his family a Kabbalah that the Baal Shem Tov passed away on the first day of Shavuos. However, He'elimu ayim mipnei hamoy. They concealed this information and basically didn't publicize it. There was no press release that was given out on the first day of Shavuos because they didn't want him to be buried that day. And essentially they did what the Ravid did, that the Meiri told us about, where the Ravid delayed it from day 1 to day 2 in order for there to be complete Jewish engagement in the burial. So that's what they did over here. And then his students buried him on the second day. This is the tradition in the community of Skver, quoted by the Nitei Gavriel. By the way, if this is accurate, then you could make an explanation here of why there would have been confusion. Because then you could say, Taka passed away on the first day, but they were not being so upfront about this because they wanted him buried on the next day. And that is a very valid theory to explain why there may have been confusion about this. But that only works if you accept that he would be buried on the second day. Remember, the Minchas Elazar had him being buried on the first day, and so then that wouldn't work according to that explanation. All right. Now let's go back to the Rishima of Reb Menachem Mendel Novkov. And he presented Reb Leivik making the protest. If you say he passed away on the first day, doesn't it mean that the Minchas Elazar is right? Not that he said that, but the idea, the Minchas Elazar is right and he's buried on the first day of Yom Tov, and that's a degradation to the kavod of the Baal Shem Tov. Heipach HaTeva. So what did the Rebbe Rashab respond to that? The Rebbe Rashab could have just responded, well, they waited the next day. The Rebbe Rashab did not respond that. What did the Rebbe Rashab respond? V'analoi, he responded, Shal Baal Shem Tov loy hoya nitzrach l'shum his askos. The Baal Shem Tov didn't need the lashon of the Gemara from the get-go, was his askos. That's the code word for the process of preparing and burying the body. The Baal Shem Tov didn't need any of that. Uvamela muvan shalo is asku by anoshim. Humans weren't involved. Rak ... That's how it appears in the Rishima. I don't know for sure. Presumably, this is supposed to mean that it was similar to Moshe Rabbeinu. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu, it says in the Torah that he was buried through Hashem. I think that's what it's saying over here, that humans weren't involved. He was buried through Hashem. So therefore, you could, it sounds from here, it happened on what? The first day. I'm not saying for sure, but it sounds like it happened on the first day. The Tira and the burial, and the Baal Shem Tov lived a miraculous life, and that miraculous life continued in his afterlife as well, in the way that he was buried. However, before we conclude just with that as being the official Chabad tradition, we'll come back to the Sikha from the Frierdiker Rebbe and Tafrei Tzadik Tes, and we'll see that it's not so pashut. Why? So after the Frierdiker Rebbe said that there's a raya that he passed away on the first day, so someone asked, when was the Kvura? Was the Kvura on the first day of Yom Tov or the second day? And how did the Kvura go down? In other words, who did the Kvura? What, Jews, Gentiles? So the Frierdiker Rebbe said this question was discussed in Lubavitch for a very long time. There were elders there who knew stories and they had traditions. So the Rebbe Rashab, my father, asked them whether they have a tradition on this. And the result was that there is no tradition on this question. So just like there was no tradition about when he passed away, though there's a raya that it was the first day, now we know for sure it was the first day, but there's no tradition as to when he was buried. But then my father said at the end, V'lo yada ishas kvurasai. We don't know. It's a pasuk we saw before being quoted that we don't know the day he passed away. Now it's actually better. It's more masim. We don't know kvurasai, the time of his burial. So that's what Rebbe Rashab said. So we don't know. Then along the way, the Rebbe Rashab said a svara. Maybe they waited till after Yom Tov. Maybe they waited till after Yom Tov. Maybe they waited till after Yom Tov. So all of a sudden, what do we have over here? It's pulling us in a different direction. Because Menachem Mendel Novikov's story sounded like the Rebbe Rashab was saying, first day, through God. And the story. That's what it sounded like. Here, there is no tradition about when he was buried. And maybe it was the first day. Maybe it was the second day. Maybe it was Isru Chag. So it's a little bit, this is a little bit enigmatic. Now, the Rebbe addressed this issue. Because there's a major question over here. In the Sikha, the Frierdiker Rebbe said, maybe Isru Chag. So the Rebbe wrote, V'tzarech iyon lahasim la'adin. How do you make Isru Chag work according to the din? What gives you a justification to leave the body to Isru Chag? If there is an ability to bury on Yom Tov, then you need to do that. Moreover, the questioner asked, was it the first day or the second day? And all of a sudden, the Frierdiker Rebbe answered a third thing that comes out of left field, that maybe Isru Chag. And the Rebbe said, maybe the Sikha, which is not Muga, the Rebbe notes, maybe the Sikha should say that Megavartem biz noch Yom Tov Rishon. In other words, maybe the Sikha was saying that maybe they waited to the second day. In other words, the Rebbe is kind of taking away the possibility that it went to Isru Chag, but then the Rebbe adds, maybe they did wait to Isru Chag because there is a din that you're allowed to wait an extra day if you want to announce in surrounding cities for people to come. It's more covered. There is a heter for that. Maybe they did that, but the Rebbe calls it a doichik. Fine. But now, so that's been a geya Isru Chag. Of the 2 days, however, of Shavuos, the Rebbe commented here as well. And the Rebbe said that of the 2 days, the second day, the lashon of the Sikh is, the second day is al pidin the Yom HaKvura. Really? For sure, the Rebbe names on the passing happened on the first day. And al pidin, the Kvura is the second day? Why? Why it l'chayda should be the first day? So the Rebbe explains, and the Rebbe clarifies what he means by that. And the Rebbe said, because the din that you need to bury right away using a Gentile, and that you're not allowed to wait till the next day for a Jew, that doesn't apply over here because the Baal Shem Tov, it says in the Sefer Shivchei Baal Shem Tov, this is a Sefer printed in the early 19th century with traditions about the Baal Shem Tov, and it says over there the process, what happened the last day of his life, and he says that he spoke to his Talmudim, and he told them, I want you guys to bury me. So mitzvah l'kai and divrei ameis, and so because mitzvah l'kai and divrei ameis, they were able to say that although he passed away on that day, if he wants us to do it, we need to do the whole thing. So therefore, al pi din, it had to be the second day. So the Rebbe is basically saying as follows: when it happened, the Rebbe is pretty clear in the Sikha, we don't know. However, given this reality, it seems less likely the first day because of the command that he wanted his Talmudim to do the whole thing, which wouldn't have been possible had it been the first day. So that lends itself stronger that it was the second day, but there is a possibility of Isru Chag, at least b'doichik, and so here you have. The Rebbe Rashab said what? It sounded like the first day through God. The second day is a possibility. The Rebbe in the Sikha calls it the day that's most appropriate because of the fact that he asked the students to do it, so that lends itself to the second day. The Frierdiker Rebbe in the Sikha said there's a possibility that maybe after Yom Tov, which the Rebbe justifies under the rule of maybe to get more people to come to the funeral and to let people know. And so the bottom line is that while we could say relatively with certainty that the Petira happened on the first day, what actually happened in terms of the burial, we don't know. So it turns out that about the Baal Shem Tov, there's a little doubt in terms of the end of his biography, Taka, in terms of the Kvura, when it happened, there's a little doubt. But I don't think there's any doubt in terms of what the Baal Shem Tov's values were and what he wanted us to live by. The three Avos, for example, of Avos HaTorah and Avos Yisrael and Avos Hashem, those three, that's something that there is no doubt about. And so we can live with the doubt of when the actual burial happened, but we cannot tolerate doubt about what type of life we should be living. And with that, I bid you a good Yom Tov, Kabbalas HaTorah, B'simcha U'B'Pnimius.